You ever wonder why only a handful of people, 5%, reach the top, why they build the businesses, live their dreams, walk with confidence, while 95% settle, struggle, and stay stuck? It's not luck. It's not talent. It's not because those 5% were born with some magic gift. The difference is this standards. Most people have dreams. They wish. They hope. They say, someday but the 5%. They don't wish. They decide. They raise their standards. They say, this is who I am. This is what I demand of myself. This is what I will not settle for. That shift from a should to a must is everything. See, 95% of people live in reaction. They're controlled by fear, by circumstances, by excuses. It's not the right time. I don't have enough money. I wasn't born into the right family. And they let that story run their lives. But the 5%, they write a different story. They take the same fear, the same doubt, the same obstacles, and they use it as fuel. When it's hard, they lean in. When they fail, they learn. When they're told no, they keep going until the world says yes. Listen, success is not about resources. It's about resourcefulness. It's about finding a way when everyone else is saying, there's no way. That's why 95% don't make it. They stop at the first wall, the 5%. They climb it, break it, or build a door right through it. So here's the question, which side do you want to live on? Because it's not about percentages. It's about a decision, a line in the sand. Right now, you can choose to stop living in the 95% that wait, wish, and wonder, and step into the 5% who act, decide, and demand more of themselves. Don't just dream big. Commit big, work big, live big. And when you do, you'll stop being part of the 95% asking why them and become part of the 5% who show the world why me. The truth is, the single greatest separator between those who win and those who merely survive is standards. Most people set their standards based on what's comfortable, what's familiar, or what they've seen others around them accept. They say things like, well, at least I've got a job. Or at least I'm paying the bills. That language alone shows where their bar is set. They live in a world of least, scraping by, settling for mediocrity because their standards are low. And when your standards are low, your results will always reflect that. You cannot expect an extraordinary life when you demand only ordinary effort from yourself. That is the harsh reality, and it's why 95% of people stay in the same cycle year after year. Now think about the 5%. They set their standards differently. They demand more from themselves than anyone else ever could. They refuse to accept excuses. They refuse to tolerate average, and they refuse to lower the bar just because the crowd around them is willing to. It's not that they don't face obstacles. They face the same problems, the same challenges, the same doubts. But the standard they've set for themselves is higher than the challenge in front of them. They say, this is who I am. This is what I expect from my life. This is what I will deliver. And once that identity is locked in, everything else must rise to meet it. They no longer negotiate with mediocrity. They no longer tolerate what drains their energy, what steals their focus, or what limits their growth. They've drawn a line, and that line is called a standard. The 95% live in the world of should. They say, I should eat healthier. I should work harder. I should save more money. I should start the business. I should spend more time with my family. And all those shoulds pile up until they become a weight on their shoulders. But they never make the shift from a should to a must. The 5% do. They don't say, I should get in shape. They say, I must get in shape because my body is the foundation of my energy and my life. They don't say, I should work harder on my business. They say, I must because my vision and my freedom are non-negotiable. They don't say, I should give more to my relationships. They say, I must because love and connection are the essence of why I'm alive. That's the power of standards. A should creates pressure and guilt. A must creates results. If you look closely at your life right now, every result you have, your health, your finances, your relationships, your level of happiness has nothing to do with what you wanted. It has everything to do with what you tolerated. People say they want to be rich, but they tolerate being broke. People say they want to be fit, but they tolerate skipping workouts. People say they want extraordinary love, but they tolerate disconnection and half-hearted effort. Your life will always reflect not your desires, but your standards. What you are willing to accept consistently becomes the reality you live in. And that's why the 5% stand out. They refuse to tolerate less than what they demand of themselves. They raise the floor on what is acceptable, and the ceiling takes care of itself. It's not about dreaming bigger. Everyone dreams big at some point. It's about refusing to settle when reality doesn't match the dream. The 95% will lower their expectations to match their current results. They'll say things like, well, maybe I don't really need to earn that much money, or maybe I don't need a partner who really understands me, or maybe my health isn't that important. They shrink the dream so they don't have to feel the pain of failing to reach it. The 5% do the opposite. They look at their reality, and if it doesn't match their vision, they raise their standards until their life has no choice but to align with what they demand. They do not lower the bar. They elevate themselves to meet it. When you study the 5%, you'll notice they often have rituals, habits, and disciplines that seem almost extreme to the average person. They wake up earlier. They push harder. They surround themselves with people who challenge them, not people who enable their excuses. They invest in themselves, whether that means reading, training, learning, or building skills, because their standard is growth, not comfort. They don't need someone else to hold them accountable because they hold themselves accountable at a level that would crush most people. And here's the secret. They're not motivated all the time. They're not inspired every day. They're human, but their standards carry them through when motivation fades. Because when something is a must, you don't wait until you feel like it. You do it because that is who you are. The 95% wait for the right time, the right opportunity, the right feeling. And while they wait, years pass, momentum is lost and life slips away. The 5% don't wait. They act even when it's messy, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's scary. Because their standard is not perfection, it's progress. They demand forward movement, and because they demand it, they create it. And every step they take reinforces the identity of a person who doesn't settle. That identity becomes unshakable, and soon their external world has no choice but to catch up with the internal standard they've set. If you've ever wondered why two people can grow up in the same environment, face the same obstacles, yet end up with completely different lives, the answer is standards. One person adapts to their surroundings and lowers their expectations to match. The other raises their standards so high that the environment has no choice but to bend. They take ownership. They take responsibility. They declare, this is the minimum I will accept from myself and from life. And the universe responds. Fear is the greatest divider between the majority and the minority. Everyone feels it. Everyone experiences those moments of doubt, uncertainty, or the icy grip of what if. The difference is not the presence of fear, but what is done with it. The 95% see fear as a signal to stop. They let it become a wall, something that blocks them from moving forward. They think, if I feel fear, it must mean danger. It must mean I'm not ready. It must mean I'll fail. And so they retreat, they procrastinate, they avoid the risk, and they never discover what's on the other side. Fear, for them, becomes the boundary line of their lives, and they build their entire existence inside that invisible fence. They don't chase opportunities, they protect themselves from possibilities. The 5%, on the other hand, feel that same fear and use it as fuel. They don't pretend it's not there. They don't deny it. They acknowledge it, they breathe it in, and they say, this feeling means I'm on the edge of growth. This fear is evidence I'm about to do something that matters. Instead of running away, they run toward it. Fear becomes their compass, pointing them to the very place they must go if they want to expand. Where most people see fear as a stop sign, the 5% see it as a green light. That single reframe changes everything. Because when fear is fuel, it gives energy, it sharpens focus, it heightens awareness. It pushes a person beyond their comfort zone into the space where transformation lives. The 95% treat fear like a verdict. If they fear speaking in public, they avoid it forever. And in doing so, they silence their voice and their influence. If they fear failure in business, they never take the leap, and in doing so, they forfeit freedom before they ever gave themselves a chance. If they fear rejection in relationships, they hold back, and in doing so, they never let others experience their full heart. Every time they choose avoidance, fear gets stronger, the wall gets higher, their world gets smaller. And slowly, without realizing it, they start living a half-life, surviving instead of thriving, safe but unfulfilled. The 5% approach is completely different. They don't let fear dictate their boundaries. They look at the same stage, the same business risk, the same vulnerable conversation, and they step into it precisely because it's uncomfortable. They use the energy of fear to elevate their performance. They channel the nervousness before speaking into passion. They turn the risk of starting a business into drive that keeps them awake, learning, building, pushing through long nights. They take the trembling vulnerability of a hard conversation and transform it into connection and authenticity. Fear, when harnessed, becomes fire. It burns away hesitation and reveals strength a person didn't even know they had. The 95% often see the 5% and think they're fearless. They must not feel what I feel. But that's an illusion. The 5% feel fear just as intensely, sometimes more. The difference is they've trained themselves not to interpret fear as a threat, but as an invitation. They know fear means there's something valuable at stake. They know fear signals growth, and because they consistently step into it, they build resilience. What once terrified them becomes normal. What once felt impossible becomes routine. That is how confidence is born, not from the absence of fear, but from repeatedly facing it until it loses its control. The 95% let fear write their story. Their inner voice says, what if you fail? What if you look stupid? What if people judge you? And they surrender to that script. The 5% write a new story. When fear whispers, what if you fail? They answer, then I'll learn and grow stronger. When fear says, what if you look stupid? They answer, then I'll prove I can handle humility and keep going. When fear says, what if people judge you? They answer, they'll judge me no matter what, so I might as well live on my own terms. The words they attach to fear determine whether it imprisons them or empowers them. Fear is energy. It's adrenaline. It's your nervous system flooding with life. And the way you channel that energy determines your destiny. The 95% waste it by letting it spin into anxiety, paralysis, and hesitation. They let it drain them. The 5% capture it. They use the surge to act quickly, to stay alert, to bring intensity to their work. Fear becomes momentum instead of stagnation. Fear becomes a push instead of a pull. Fear becomes a reason to move instead of a reason to stop. Think about every major breakthrough in human history, every invention, every revolution, every bold leap forward. None of it came from comfort. It all came from someone standing face to face with fear and choosing to act anyway. The 95% wait for the fear to disappear before they move. The 5% understand that fear never disappears. It only changes form as you grow. The courage to act in the presence of fear is the skill that separates those who merely dream from those who live their dreams. Fear doesn't have to be the enemy. It can be the greatest ally if you choose to reinterpret it. When your heart pounds before a presentation, it means your body is preparing to give its all. When your hands shake before a big decision, it means you care deeply about the outcome. When your mind races with doubt, it means you're stepping into the unknown. And the unknown is where growth lives. The 5% choose to see fear as a gift, a signal that they are alive, stretching, expanding. And because of that choice, they live lives that most only imagine. Most people live in a permanent state of intention. They talk about what they're going to do. They make promises to themselves. They create lists of goals. They even get excited when they imagine the future. But they never follow through. They live in the world of someday. Someday I'll start that business. Someday I'll write that book. Someday I'll get in shape. Someday I'll make that call. And someday never comes because life doesn't reward intention. It rewards execution. This is why 95% remain stuck. They confuse movement with progress. They mistake thinking about it for actually doing it. They fill notebooks with plans, watch endless motivational videos, dream big dreams, and yet years later, their lives look almost exactly the same. Their intention is real, but their action is missing, and without action, intention dies. The 5% live differently. They understand that action is the great separator. They don't wait until everything is perfect. They don't wait until they feel ready. They don't wait for certainty because they know certainty never comes. They move, and they figure it out along the way. They understand that clarity comes through action, not before it. While the 95% are still waiting for the perfect plan, the 5% are already learning, failing, adjusting, and moving closer to their goal. And because of that, they build momentum. Momentum is everything. Momentum creates energy, and energy creates results. Once results begin to appear, confidence grows. And with confidence, the cycle continues. The 5% know that the hardest step is always the first one, so they don't delay it. They act before their brain has a chance to talk them out of it. The 95% believe they need motivation before they act. They think, I'll start when I feel like it. I'll go to the gym when I feel inspired. I'll launch my business when I'm confident. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. If you wait for it, you'll be waiting forever. The 5% understand that action creates motivation. They know that when you move, energy rises. When you act, momentum appears. They don't wait to feel ready. They act to feel ready. They understand that consistency builds discipline, and discipline builds freedom, because freedom is not found in intention. It's found in execution. The 95% are addicted to preparation. They research endlessly, hoping to eliminate every risk before they begin. They chase certainty, believing that if they just know enough, they'll succeed without struggle. But preparation without execution becomes procrastination disguised as productivity. They spend so much time getting ready that they never actually start. The 5% do prepare, but only enough to get moving. They know that most of the learning will happen on the journey, not before it. They'd rather be in the arena taking punches and adjusting than standing outside the ring, wondering what it might feel like. Their standard is movement. Their habit is execution. Another difference is accountability. The 95% say what they're going to do, but when life gets inconvenient, they let themselves off the hook. They give themselves excuses, and excuses pile up until they form a wall around their dreams. The 5% hold themselves to a higher standard. If they say they'll do something, they see it through. Their word is law to themselves. They don't break promises to their own soul because they know every time they do, they weaken their identity. Following through on action builds self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation of power. The 95% break that trust over and over again by staying in intention, while the 5% strengthen it by acting regardless of difficulty. Intention is comfortable because it doesn't require risk. You can dream without the chance of failure. You can plan without the sting of rejection. You can talk about what you're going to do, and people will even applaud you for having ambition. But ambition without execution becomes delusion. The 5% embrace risk because they know risk is the price of reward. They're willing to be seen trying and failing because they value progress more than image. They take the leap while others are still building the perfect parachute, and by the time the 95% are ready, the 5% are already miles ahead, seasoned, scarred, and stronger. The 95% also struggle because they overestimate what can be done in a short time and underestimate what can be done consistently over a long time. They want instant gratification. If they don't see results right away, they stop. They join a gym, go for a week, don't see change, and quit. They start a project, encounter obstacles, and abandon it. They live in a cycle of starting and stopping, intention and hesitation, never long enough to build mastery. The 5% play a longer game. They commit to the process, not just the outcome. They know small actions, repeated consistently, create massive results. They focus less on perfection today and more on accumulation over time. They understand compound growth, whether it's in skills, money, relationships, or health. Action repeated daily becomes habit, and habit creates transformation. The 95% let fear of judgment dictate their actions. They worry what others will think if they fail, so they don't even begin. They carry the weight of other people's opinions and let that weight pin them down. The 5% act anyway. They know judgment is inevitable no matter what they do, so they'd rather be judged for chasing their dream than for never trying. They understand that other people's opinions won't pay their bills, won't heal their body, won't create their future. Action belongs to them alone, and so does the reward. They do not outsource their destiny to the comfort of approval. They step into discomfort because they know discomfort is the currency of growth. Intention without action creates regret. People reach the end of their lives not regretting the risks they took, but the ones they didn't. They regret the words left unsaid, the projects never started, the love never expressed, the potential never fulfilled. The 5% know this truth, and they refuse to live in that regret. They use action as the antidote. Even if they fail forward with experience gained and wisdom earned. Every step they take, even the wrong ones, creates progress. The 95% spend years stuck in the same place, while the 5% move through failure after failure until success finally appears. And when it does, people call them lucky, not realizing that luck is just persistence in action. The distance between intention and action is the distance between mediocrity and mastery, between the 95% and the 5%. The gap is not talent, not resources, not opportunity, it's execution. Failure is the point where most people stop. For the 95%, failure is proof that they weren't good enough, proof that they should never have tried, proof that the doubts and fears they carried were correct all along. When something doesn't work out, they retreat, they shrink back into comfort, and they tell themselves a story that keeps them safe. Maybe this wasn't meant for me. Maybe it's not my time. Maybe success is only for others. They see failure as final, like a door slamming shut. And once they accept that story, they stop knocking, they stop pushing, they stop believing. Their dreams die not because they were impossible, but because they surrendered too early. The 5% have a completely different relationship with failure. They expect it. They welcome it. They know that failure is not the end of the path, but part of the path. Every misstep, every setback, every so-called defeat is information. It's feedback. It's the world saying, not this way, try another. For them, failure isn't a verdict, it's data. It teaches, it refines, it strengthens. Instead of shrinking, they expand. Instead of retreating, they advance with new knowledge. Failure is their greatest teacher, and because they're willing to learn, they eventually win. The 95% hold on to failure like a wound. They replay it, relive it, and let it define them. One rejection, and they stop asking. One business attempt that collapses, and they never try again. One heartbreak, and they never open themselves to love. They chain themselves to that moment and make it the center of their identity. They say, I am someone who failed, instead of, I am someone who is learning. They confuse a single event with a permanent state. That is why they stay stuck. They take failure personally, and personalizing failure makes it unbearable. The 5% detach their identity from the outcome. If something doesn't work, it doesn't mean they're a failure. It means their approach failed, and approaches can be changed. They don't tie their self-worth to whether or not they succeed in one attempt because they know mastery comes through repetition. A child doesn't learn to walk without falling. An athlete doesn't master a skill without missing. An entrepreneur doesn't build success without stumbling. The 5% understand that failure is proof of action, and action is the only path to progress. They don't fear failure because they see it as evidence that they're in the game. The 95% avoid failure at all costs, and in doing so, they avoid growth. They stay in their comfort zones, choosing safety over expansion. They never take risks big enough to truly test their potential. They avoid the possibility of embarrassment, criticism, or disappointment, but in doing so, they avoid the possibility of transformation. Their lives become smaller and smaller because every time they say no to risk, they say no to opportunity. They protect themselves from failure and end up protecting themselves from success at the same time. The 5% chase failure because they know each one brings them closer to mastery. They're willing to look foolish in the beginning because they know everyone looks foolish before they look skilled. They're willing to fall short because falling short teaches them how to stretch further next time. They don't confuse failure with defeat. To them, defeat only happens when you stop trying. As long as they keep moving, they're never defeated, no matter how many times they stumble. This mindset allows them to attempt more, risk more, and eventually achieve more. While the 95% are still paralyzed by their last failure, the 5% have failed 10 more times and gathered 10 times more lessons. The 95% interpret failure emotionally. They let it wound their pride, hurt their ego, and confirm their fears. They carry shame around it, and that shame keeps them silent. They hide their failures from others, which means they hide their growth. The 5% interpret failure strategically. They dissect it. They ask what worked, what didn't, what can I do differently? They treat it like feedback from a coach. They know the scoreboard isn't fixed after one play. It's the adjustments made after each play that determine the final outcome. This objectivity gives them an advantage because instead of wallowing in emotion, they are constantly refining their approach. The 95% seek perfection. They want their first attempt to succeed, their first business to thrive, their first effort to be applauded. And when it doesn't happen, they give up. The 5% don't seek perfection. They seek progress. They know perfection is a trap, a standard that paralyzes people from even starting. They are willing to be imperfect in public, to put out work that isn't flawless, to take actions that may not land exactly right. Because every imperfect attempt is another step forward, another opportunity to improve. Perfectionists stay frozen, while progress seekers create results. The 95% let failure shape their future decisions. If they once tried and it didn't work, they stop believing it ever could. They generalize because I failed once, I will fail again. They create a rule for themselves based on fear. The 5% let failure shape their future strategies, not their future identity. They don't say, I failed, therefore I can't. They say, I failed, therefore I've learned something others haven't. That shift allows them to move forward with more wisdom, not less confidence. Every failure becomes an investment into their growth, a deposit into the account of resilience. The 95% see failure as loss. Time lost, money lost, energy lost. The 5% see failure as tuition. They understand there's a cost to learning anything valuable. College students pay tuition to sit in classrooms. The 5% pay tuition in the form of mistakes, rejections, and setbacks. They don't resent the cost because they know the return on that investment is mastery, and mastery pays for itself over and over again. The 95% avoid paying that tuition, and in doing so, they stay uneducated in the real lessons of success. The 95% stop at failure, the 5% start at failure. For one group, it is the end of the road. For the other, it is the beginning of the path. The very thing that most people run from is the thing the few run toward. And that difference is why the 95% never reach their potential, while the 5% live lives that others only dream about. The stories people tell themselves shape their entire reality. The 95% live under the weight of stories they never question. Stories like, I'm not smart enough. I don't have the right background. I've always been this way. It's too late for me. Or people like me don't succeed. These stories don't come out of nowhere. They are often inherited. Absorbed from parents, teachers, society, past failures, or painful experiences. Over time, these stories become invisible scripts, guiding decisions, limiting ambition, and creating an identity that feels inescapable. Once a person believes the story, they stop challenging it, and that story quietly becomes the ceiling of their life. They aren't controlled by lack of opportunity or lack of talent. They're controlled by the narrative they repeat inside their own head. The 5% write their own story. They understand that the story you attach to your life determines what you believe is possible. They don't allow a painful past to dictate their future. They don't allow society's expectations to box them in. They don't allow old identities to define new possibilities. Instead, they ask, what story will empower me? What story will make me stronger? What story will pull me forward? And then they choose to live inside that narrative. They decide to be the author instead of the character. When circumstances tell them they're limited, they create a story of resilience. When people tell them they're not capable, they create a story of defiance. When setbacks come, they create a story of growth. This is why their lives expand, because their story expands first. The 95% get trapped in the story of circumstances. They believe life happens to them, not for them. They say, I can't get ahead because of where I live, or I can't succeed because I don't have connections, or I can't win because the system is against me. These stories may have some truth in them, but they're only one version of the truth. Yet when someone repeats a story long enough, it becomes their reality. Their actions, or lack of actions, will always be consistent with the narrative they've accepted. If someone believes they can't, they won't. If someone believes the world is stacked against them, they'll never look for ways to rise above it. The story becomes a cage they willingly lock themselves in, and the key is in their own hands, but they've forgotten they hold it. The 5% see the same circumstances, but they frame them differently. Where others see disadvantage, they see fuel. Where others see rejection, they see redirection. Where others see unfairness, they see a chance to grow stronger than those who had it easier. They deliberately choose empowering meanings. Instead of saying, this happened to me, so I can't, they say, this happened to me, so I must. They use their story as leverage, not limitation. They know that pain can be turned into purpose if you tell it the right way. That's why so many people who succeed at the highest levels come from difficult beginnings. They chose to rewrite the meaning of their story until it empowered them instead of imprisoning them. The 95% often let other people write their story. They allow family, peers, or culture to tell them what's possible, what's acceptable, and what's realistic. They follow paths they never chose because they didn't realize they could question the narrative. They accept labels given to them, and those labels become identity. The 5% reject that passivity. They know that nobody else gets to write their story unless they hand over the pen. They take ownership of the narrative. They say, I decide who I am. I decide what I'm capable of. I decide what my future will look like. And because they claim authorship, they open possibilities that others never see. They don't deny reality, but they refuse to give it the final word. They are constantly editing, revising, and upgrading their story to match the life they want to live. The 95% replay old chapters of their story over and over again. They define themselves by what went wrong. They carry failure like baggage, and every new opportunity gets weighed down by the old memory. I failed once, so I'll fail again. I was hurt once, so I'll always be hurt. I was broke once, so I'll always be broke. They relive the same pain until it becomes identity. The 5% acknowledge the past, but they don't live there. They treat the past as a chapter, not the whole book. They turn the page. They take the lessons, but not the limitations. They understand that yesterday does not decide tomorrow unless you keep rereading it. They choose to write new chapters boldly, knowing that the pen is always in their hand no matter how the story started. The 95% let their story be shaped by fear. They imagine the worst case scenario and let that dictate their actions. They say, what if I fail? And build an entire story around that fear. They never ask, what if I succeed? The 5% flip the script. They acknowledge fear but build a story around possibility instead of disaster. They focus on the vision of what could be, and that story pulls them forward with greater strength than fear can hold them back. By choosing a story of possibility, they create courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something greater than fear deserves the leading role in their narrative. The 95% let their story disempower them. The 5% let their story empower them. That single choice makes all the difference. Life is less about what happens to you and more about the story you tell yourself about what happened. Two people can go through the exact same event and come out with opposite lives because they wrote opposite stories. One lets the event define them as broken, unlucky, or defeated. The other defines themselves as stronger, wiser, more resilient because of it. The event is the same, the story is different. And because the story is different, the future is different. The 95% are controlled by stories they didn't consciously choose. The 5% consciously create the story they live in every day. They repeat it to themselves until it becomes belief. They visualize it until it becomes reality. They live as though the story is already true, and soon their actions and results rise to meet it. The story becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.